Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We are live streaming.
So good evening, members, officers, guests and members of the public who may be watching tonight's events on YouTube. This is the first session of the External Partnerships Select Committee in its new council year of 2020-21. I've been appointed chairman as our previous chairman, Councillor Sarah Croak, has been elected to the post of Deputy Mayor. I was previously chair of this committee 3 years ago before becoming Deputy Mayor and then Mayor last year. So it's obviously the way to go. And I'm joined today by our Vice Chairman, Councillor Morgan Rise. The objective of this committee is to discover more about the day-to-day activities of those external partners with whom the borough works on a day-to-day basis. It's there to build on the good relationships that already exist and to identify any needs or issues that may need further action by the borough. Tonight, we will be starting with a presentation by Louise Livingston, our Executive Head of Transformation, who will be giving details of the borough's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Then we'll be learning more about Surrey Heath Prepared from its chairman, James Robertson. And James will be followed by Tracy Heine of Surrey Heath Age Concern, who will tell us more about how they've been involved. Later, we'll be joined by Inspector Alec James, our new local Surrey Heath Police Commander, who will be updating us on the Surrey Heath Community Safety Partnership and other issues. So I think we can look forward to an interesting evening. So that's my announcements finished. First of all, we'll review the minutes of the last meeting, which was held on the 11th of February. Everybody in agreement that these are an accurate record of what happened?
Agreed.
Great. Can we ask Councillor Rice to sign those when he gets a moment? I think he was there at that last meeting. So next point is declarations of interest. Does anybody have any declarations, pecuniary or non-pecuniary, that they need to declare in respect of what's being discussed tonight? Councillor Rice.
I'm not sure if that was something that we would need to discuss, but just as a non-pecuniary, I'm pretty sure this is one that can cover nearly every councillor attending this meeting, is that we've all at some point been involved with Surrey Heath Prepared. I know there are councillors that have been more involved to varying levels, but I think we could just, if possible, one that covers us non-pecuniary, that we've all been involved with Surrey Heath Prepared, and obviously it's not a conflict of interest for us.
I don't think that's going to count. I think that's, as you say, applies to everybody here. Has anybody got anything other than that to raise? Sure. Councillor Garrett.
Yes, Chair. I am a newly elected by the council, a member of Surrey Heath Age Concern. So just wanted to make you aware of that.
Okay, Councillor Deach.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, a founding member of Surrey Heath Prepared and a member of the steering group.
Thank you. Any more declarations? No, thank you very much. So let's move on with today's events then. So can I ask Louise Livingston to kick us off, please?
Good evening, councillors, officers and members of the public. So my role this evening, I'm going to give you a very short presentation because I think it's really important to hear from our other partners, but it's just good to frame what the council has done with regards to its response to COVID-19. So a major incident was declared on the 19th of March, which means that as a local authority, we have a statutory duty to respond to that emergency. So we've worked with partners both at a county and a local level. As I've already said, this evening's is really about the emphasis on the local response and how we've worked with partners locally and how everyone has been part of that. And I think it's really important to hear from those partners this evening. But just to give a little bit of context, obviously we also need to work back up a level at county level and to understand how the national instructions coming out of government disseminate down to the county and then down into our local areas. And that's done through the local resilience forum, which is the county's emergency planning group. and that consists of key partners right across county, just naming a few: Surrey County Council, all the districts and boroughs of Surrey, the military, health, police, and central government, so MHCLG as well. So those are just to name a number of the partners, and they would be dealing with the bigger, sort of more macro items of this emergency, and obviously ensuring that all of those are dealt with. So they would be dealing, for example, with the PPE requirements right across the county and making sure that distribution had happened across that. But also, obviously, we've then got our role to play at a district level. So if I could just ask for the first slide just to be shared, it'd just be easier just to share some of the data. One of the biggest areas that the county got involved with is the welfare support needed and shielded for vulnerable people. The support needed for the business and support needed for business in the form of grants being issued, because obviously those are things on the ground that we can deal with and we can obviously respond to. So just giving you a few facts and figures, I think quite important facts and figures of some of the things that the borough has been involved with is 20,000 plus welfare calls. Now, this involved us actually redeploying a lot of our staff to make those calls, and that was coming out of county from the shielded project which the government put in place around in response to the NHS, and then also our own welfare vulnerable groups that we were aware of. And that was a key area that we also worked obviously with our partners at Surrey Heath Prepared, and obviously they will come on to obviously talk about how the part that they played with that and how we connected with them. Just while we're on that, I'm going to sort of jump around on this particular graphic. So that then also goes down to the households that we provided 450 food parcels to and delivered 350 prescriptions. It was those people, it's through those calls that we were making to those people, and sometimes those calls were the only contact that those people were actually getting. So it was a really important role that we were playing on that part. So then going back up to the 13.38 million, this is the business support grants, but again, the scheme that obviously was put out by the government, but obviously needed to be put in at a local level. And that's helped over 1,000 local firms, and obviously the importance of the economy and keeping it going. Other facts on there as well, important facts, emergency accommodation for the homeless. So it was very much, again, very important in the fact that the government wanted people to be safe, and that was the paramount importance. So again, a further 20 homeless that would not have met normally the homeless criteria were housed, because obviously it was all about the safety and keeping everybody safe. Other facts you've got there, you've got increase in refuge, which more people working from home. So we have seen a lot there. But again, there's been a great response from the community to the refuge collectors. And I know that's gone down very well with the teams. We've also got there about our virtual meetings. Obviously, we're having one right now. But again, it's quite a feat in the fact that we had to obviously get that sort of organised very quickly to ensure that the work of the council continued as it needed to, and that we could still get our message out to councillors and to obviously the wider community, which is really the important part. There's some other facts on there. We also had a grant scheme that we put together very quickly, which is an emergency grant scheme for local charities. As it's saying there, we've actually committed 53,000, but actually paid out 48,000, and we're moving those grants forward as quickly as we possibly can when charities are obviously making those requests to us. As you can also see, the meals at home that were delivered went up quite exponentially as well. So that was 11,500 in this period of lockdown. We just got there on the right hand side some information about the staffing. As I was saying, what we had to do was, because this was an emergency, we had to redeploy our staff, and it was just really there just showing some facts around that. So 17% of our staff were fully put into the COVID-19 response, and that was involving, for example, setting up a welfare cell whereby that was then on a rota basis, and this was where people were making calls out to the public, and it was then how we got that information translated into the needs that were coming out of the telephone call, the 20,000 telephone calls that I mentioned sort of earlier. And then we had 65% of staff, and a lot of those people were doing their day job and then also then making the welfare calls that I talked about. So again, sort of splitting their role, and we had 16% of staff that basically remained on the day job, and a lot of those are the support functions that you needed to obviously keep going during this process. So for example, IT became extremely important because obviously we had to try and get everyone, as many people as we can, working from home. I can see that doesn't add up to 100%. It is 98%. And just to add that obviously 2% of staff were obviously maybe unwell or doing other things. So that gives you just an overview of the response to COVID-19. We're now at the council moving into what we're calling recovery. It's just a term that is used, but obviously that means is it's how we now start to move, and it's not forgetting what we've already done, but it's how we move to maintenance for a period of time where we will continue to make welfare calls, but we will be reducing those calls and making them less proactive, and actually getting the person to actually phone us if they need any help. And then actually starting to move to the day job increasing. Now the day job did continue all the way through COVID-19 as well, because again we have statutory duties that we need to make sure that we're fulfilling at all times. What we'd also like to do is, I have mentioned recovery, and if it's acceptable to the chair, what we would like to request at maybe at a later stage is perhaps coming back maybe at the September meeting to talk through the recovery response and obviously give you further details. But that's the detail I was going to share with you this evening. Obviously, if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them.
On questions, the three first speakers are talking about a very, a common subject behind the scenes. Maybe we could take all the questions after the three speakers have spoken, yes? If you're happy with that. So thank you for that, Louise. Can we now move on to James Robertson, who's chairman of Surrey Heath Prepared. So James.
Thank you. With me tonight is Reverend Mike Thomason, who, as you know, is the minister at High Cross Church.
Joe, can we have the next slide?
Can we have the next slide, please? Could we have the next slide, please? Joe, thank you very much. Thank you. With me tonight is Reverend Mike Thomason, who, as you know, is the minister at High Cross Church. I'm honoured to speak to the Executive Partnership Select Committee and grateful for the opportunity to bring light to a special human story which has been delivered across the borough. Next slide, please. Next slide.
There's a few seconds today.
Next slide. Just waiting for the next slide to come up.
He's asking very nicely.
Yes.
I think if we wait 1 second and...
Okay.
Joe, are you having a problem with the slides?
Yes, I am. Sorry, I can't make it move on to the next slide. I'm really sorry.
Okay.
Kate, are you able to take over?
I don't have the PowerPoint, Joe. It's you.
Okay. I'm really sorry, everyone.
Joe, I will see
Yeah.
if I can open it on my iPad. Give me 1 second.
Okay.
Sorry about this, James.
No, that's all right. It's a little tricky to explain without the slides, so I'll pause for a second if I may.
Yeah,
Joe,
just,
can I ask you to come out of screen share?
Yeah, I'm trying.
Yay.
Hey.
So
Oh, there we go. We've moved on.
Did Eddie do that?
No, it's you, Joe.
this is what I'd like to cover. I'll be quick to point out that we haven't finished. We're still in flight, and the data and the summary and the analysis is not yet complete. I'm going to deliberately leave out names and personalities, so I'll take a generic approach to cover the Surrey Heath Prepared story, and I'm going to refer to Surrey Heath Prepared as SHP. And we'll leave questions until either the end of this or the end of everything. Next slide, please. Yay. So I'm using the Bruce Tuckman, who in 1965 produced the theory of group dynamics development, which I actually used as a very useful way to understand how we were evolving as a team. So I started with our initial group. We did a mind clearing exercise, and I came first to brief Tim Passion. He was extremely supportive. I was able to clarify the situation, and for us, that gave us the legitimacy and the sort of license to operate. We were assured of resources, and he understood our complementary with an E approach, that we were going to work together. And I was then able to link up with Louise and Jane, and we've had a fantastic relationship ever since. In these early days, we had to be clear on what we wanted to do. This was good neighbours concept, just helping out each other. We were not going to stray into areas of expertise such as mental health and other things. And the duration of this, one could easily see that this nationally was going to take months. And so we needed to have a plan that was going to be simple and robust. There was absolutely no blueprint or no plan to take off the shelf. So we brainstormed the risks, we tried to anticipate the needs, and we produced a methodology. We set up processes. We ensured that all the wards were covered. We took over food distribution from Beeson. We brought in a logistics specialist to advise on procurement and delivery. We established a website. We built communication infrastructure to inform and support and encourage volunteers to join us. So when the national lockdown occurred on the 23rd of March, we'd actually been operating for about 8 days, and that was a crucial 8 days, which allowed us to get set up and organized. And the lockdown criteria allowed us to continue to operate in support of those who needed help. It not only brought about an increased need, but fortunately for us, it meant that more people were available to help to volunteer and join our cause. And then going back to Bruce Tuckman, we reached the sort of the norming performing stage, probably in mid to late April. By then we'd learnt lessons, we'd responded to feedback, and we'd refined our processes. And we were able to scale back the number of meetings that were taking place. Next slide, please. So this absolutely was a coalition of the willing. Everyone was volunteers, there was no authority, and we had to adopt a collegiate and flexible approach as circumstances and restrictions tightened and are now subsequently easing. We established a steering group to guide the organisation, and this grew in time as we added additional skill sets of finance and legal. We established the hub at Highcross Church just down from here. We had an operations cell. We had a food bank and a call centre. We needed to control access, set up security, and each ward was run by a coordinator. And as you all know, they differ massively. Different geographic areas of responsibility, varying dynamics, varying demographics, concentration of housing, availability of shops, numbers of volunteers, and churches and local charities. And so there were three distinct operating models. There was the hub and spoke, where the coordinator had a close team and would use them to go off to areas around the ward to provide the support. Others were more fortunate and had almost a saturation of volunteers, where almost every street had someone to pick up any requirements for help that existed by street. And then there were the coordinators who built their teams on existing or locally created structures. Some of them operated largely independently and just pulled on SHP as required. I'll just touch on the food bank. Not yet. The food bank actually is a lot more complex than just handing out food. The procurement and the storage and the accounting and distribution is a major operation in itself. Initially, we got stocks from shops that were closing in Camberley just before the lockdown, and then that needed supplementing with the right sort of food. And this got easier as supermarkets adjust their ways of operating, and we were able to set up a procurement system. We joined in with the council here, and we provided parcels for their vulnerable too. And of course, it's worth noting that, as you've heard already, we weren't the only show in town. The Vulnerable, the Shielded, and a number of charities were continuing to operate during this period. Next slide, please. I want to just touch on governance and control for this sort of rather volunteer organisation. So we had a website and a database, and we had a fantastic support from a risk management team. And they put the website through a number of iterations, which allowed us to automate requests to volunteer and requests for help. And this minimized the handling of personal data and then sped up the response process. And it also allowed us in time then to be able to monitor data activity. On the website, we set up our FAQs, our frequently asked questions, and this allowed us to exert an element of control. We were able to make clear to the public what we were offering and how, but we also had a hidden page for coordinators and volunteers, so we could put up guidance and advice to them on how they should operate. And we got some really useful advice on volunteering protocols from Voluntary Support North Surrey. We also used, once the lockdown had come in, we also then issued ID cards, and we checked with the local police here so that as the lockdown restrictions were coming into play, our volunteers had a legitimate reason to be out and about. And finance I'll touch on in a bit more detail, but we set up a finance policy, we appointed a finance officer, and then we ran the charitable donations through High Cross Church, which is a registered charity and complied with charity regulations. Next slide. So internal communications to start with was quite haphazard. There was so much noise, and we needed to bring an element of control to that and bring it to single points of communication. So first of all, the steering group's linked with the coordinators. We had weekly Zoom meetings with them, and we set up a broadcast only WhatsApp. We responded when we could, and when we could respond with written responses, then one person's question could then be answered to all. And as and when we can, and we're doing that particularly during the drawdown, we produce written statements, not only for them to reflect on, but for them to be able to pass on to their volunteers as well. As a steering group, we set off at 100 miles an hour. We had Zoom meetings every day, and then it was testament that we were reaching that norming performing stage, when by sort of early May, we had reduced to about twice a week. Externally, we had a SHP Facebook that was helping to inform what SHP was delivering and what help was available. It was able to encourage volunteers. We were able to support national advice, and we were also able to ask for charitable donations. In addition to the social media, right at the beginning, before the lockdown came, we started doing leaflet drops around the area. Sadly, we weren't able to complete that. But once the lockdown had started, we then put out banners around the area, sort of key footfall locations, to inform of Surrey Heath Prepared. I produced the press release, and sadly, I wasn't able to get the sort of interest, maybe local television interest, to capture this special story, but we did manage to get a few interviews. Next slide. So on finance, we had some really good charitable donations. Some came in from corporate organisations, and some just from the public who were seeing what we're doing and wanted to support our cause. There were some admin costs involved, but most of the money has been spent on food bank procurement. Any charitable money that we have at the end, the steering group will allocate out to suitable charities. Right at the beginning, we were really fortunate that the council invested in High Cross. We were able to set up an IT suite and some communications, and that was really important. It gave us the ability to operate a really professional call centre, and in time for our call centre staff to be able to operate off-site. In addition, their support to cover the running costs for the hub and high cross, which otherwise had been closed, was really important. It covered security, and we had an attempted break-in. Covered utilities, and it's allowing us now to return back to normal. We've had one grant, and there's one more hopefully on its way. Next slide. So in terms of our outputs, I haven't gathered all the data because I would be here for most of the evening trying to explain it all, but pharmacy deliveries was absolutely our biggest task, and it just continued to ride exponentially, and I can only assume that there's some very happy pharmacies in the local area for whom we've taken the workload off them. There were three levels of food. There was the click and collect, you know, I can afford to pay, I've ordered it from the supermarket, but I'm in isolation or I simply can't get there, and we'll pick it up for them. We set up a finance deposit shopping service for those who weren't able to do that on the internet but had the money. They deposited money, we bought it for them, and then we took the money out of the deposit service, and that was absolutely cleared by the Financial Conduct Authority. And of course, last was the food bank. The food bank for those who did not have the money or means to provide for their own. The third sort of output we called other, and that a lot of that was really just people in the call centre dealing with calls. Most of those were just calls, understanding what SHP did, that we're going to be around. But the one thing that almost swamped us was when the government started handing out the government parcels to the shielded. A lot of them were phoning up, asking what it was for, and seeking to return them. Next slide. So here we are now in the drawdown. You know, SHP was only a temporary organisation created for the short term to fill this emergency. We are going to finish on the 1st July. That has been widely broadcast to all of our staff and all of our volunteers. In the interim, we are trying to drive down demand. We've told pharmacies that they must now pick up responsibility for their own deliveries, and we've also given the volunteers details of national free pharmacy delivery organisations, and we're in discussion with Beeson, who are going to pick up the food parcel responsibility. We've been working with the community partnerships here in the council for some time, and I think we have a really good plan with the support of BSNS to help transfer back to local charities and the local action groups who are the experts. But we are also looking to help them by encouraging some of our volunteers and some in the community to join those local charities to help augment them as they pick up additional responsibility. Next slide, please. And finally, I just thought a few reflections. I was really taken with how well everybody knew each other, not just across the political spectrum, but across multi-agencies. And I think that's really testimony to the networks, the networking and relationships, all that been invested in beforehand, very much came to the fore during this period. We set off on a journey into the unknown, and I don't know whether all our coordinators necessarily would have signed up if they knew what they were taking on. And I was really taken. The coordinators were absolutely pivotal to this. They worked incredibly hard, and one could see some of the strains taking place. And after a while, we realized that some of them needed some additional support, and we found counselling support for them, for those that needed it. But it was a huge and mammoth task that they undertook. We're now in that process of smooth transition. Whilst we will close down, it's incumbent on the other organisations to step up. We're working with the council here. Their communication side will be important to signpost and alert as we go back to business as usual with the existing charities picking up the responsibility. I think this is such a special little story that we've had in the borough. I believe that our borough has probably been supported like no other borough in the country by the way that our local community has come together. I've written and thanked the volunteers. We're chatting with the Deputy Mayor as to how we can do some sort of recognition, but I put that to the Select Committee as well, that they might wish to think of some sort of means, perhaps not now, but in time, that recognises what has taken place. And also, I think it's important having built this thing that Surrey Heath Prepared has some long-term utility. So we will archive it, but the utility of the website will continue, and we are following up with a lessons learned process. We'll write everything up and it will sit there for a later date, should it be required as a contingency plan. The council's also invested heavily in High Cross Church, so you have, if you like, an alternative headquarters down there with a comm suite and setup, should you need it for any other reasons at all. Next slide. That concludes my quick canter through Surrey Heath Prepared. Thank you for listening, and I'd like to thank again the council for their excellent support and relationship as we've undertaken this journey together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. That's a very impressive exercise you've had there, which we can all be very proud of, that it was in our borough. So I'm sure there'll be lots of questions that will come up later on. But just to finish this section, let's move now to Tracy Heine of the Surrey Heath Aged Concern, please. Tracy, are you there?
Yes, I'm there.
Over to you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Can I have the first slide, please? It's up. Right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for inviting me. I'm with Gwen, the chair of SHAC. We're a small charity supporting the independent living by befriending isolated elderly people in their homes and social events for those more able. Can I have the next slide, please? With the help of the trustees, voluntary services and Jane, I made contact within Surrey Heath. As you're all aware, through networking, you can achieve so much more. I successfully applied for a grant to employ a befriending coordinator, Angela, who worked tirelessly in visiting the elderly people on our waiting list awaiting befrienders. We then held a recruitment drive for volunteers in Camberley Town Centre. The waiting list was reduced from 39 in November 19 to 16 in March. This involved visiting the elderly person and completing an assessment form and finding out the likes and dislikes. Then going back to our list of DBS checked volunteers and seeing which has most in common, a bit like blind date. A meeting is arranged with both the SHAC representative in attendance. After the meeting, they are both called to see if they're happy, so the befriender visits on a regular weekly basis. A monthly visiting form is completed and any concerns brought back to SHAC's attention and action. We were getting into a good position. We'd employed a cafe manager to continue the good work done by Colin Keeley Catering Company. We had the perfect team and we're in the process of completing a tailor-made database. We appreciated the council for letting us utilise the Rainbow Cafe, where elderly people can come for a chat and mix with their peers in a friendly, affordable place. In normal times, this is well utilised. We have tea and memories, which is high tea, bingo and a quiz once a week, which is very popular. Next slide, please. As you can see, this is some of our trustees and befrienders accepting the award for the best volunteer team, which we were delighted to receive. The other pictures of Carol, one of our loyal befrienders and drivers. Next slide, please. We acted quickly to COVID, getting all necessary paperwork to our home offices. We telephoned all our befrienders, volunteers and other elderly people we support, reassuring them. Most of them were scared, confused, worried how they were going to manage. We rang them twice a week, some more, giving them a mobile number they could ring anytime, from 8 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock at night. I then volunteered with Surrey Heath Prepared, as I felt that they were doing a remarkable job getting everything in place, and they passed me befriending referrals, initially approximately 30, and then I supported the hub taking remote calls and requests. Next slide, please. The mental well-being seemed to deteriorate as the elderly people realised COVID wasn't going to be finished in a few weeks. We spent a lot of time reassuring, distracting, learning more about the people we support and their families, helping them with practical things like food, medication, worries, referring where we felt the need, but always keeping in the loop so no one falls through the gap. We helped with shopping problems, those technically not able to get shopping slots, sloppy shopping numbers given out, getting shopping and medication for those unable, getting electric cards and BT cards topped up, because some of their mental issues were that they were worried that they were going to get into debt, putting food requests onto SHP where necessary. Next slide, please. There are so many issues, I'm not going to go through them with you. These are examples that we had to deal with. Supporting wives who'd lost their husbands, trying to arrange funerals that they were at the point of despair, one so desperate she threatened to kill herself as she couldn't cope with the distress, plus completing the necessary forms. Elderly people going through palliative care and chemotherapy treatments. These are terrible situations in normal circumstances. Can I have the next slide, please? We need to move forward, trying to support these people, giving them the confidence where they're able to venture out. But we cannot say categorically it's safe. They're scared, feeling unable, physically and mentally. One of our ladies decided she was going to go out and would not wait for a daughter. And then we heard she had a panic attack and fell over. This was an elderly, reasonably fit physical lady before, and now has lost her confidence. We need to be supportive and encouraging for them to have a fulfilling life. Next slide, please. We will continue telephone befriending, emailing, sending postcards. They really appreciate that. Just a little note to say, hi, we're here, we're thinking of you, here's our number, ring at any time. We'll take a study to see who has access to gardens where the befriender and befriendee can social distance. And we'll supply secure masks and gloves for our befrienders and make sure risk assessments are in place. The Rainbow Cafe is too small to social distance. Maybe as time goes by, we could look at an extension or new premises. Funding is a problem though, as we only have grants as our income at present. Next slide, please. There will be an increase of referrals. SHAC can continue to support, as some will be brought forward from SHP because I'm hearing some sad stories. Potential increases in volunteers, possibly from SHP. However, I feel most people will go back to work. We managed to get grants to support the charity, thanks to Surrey Heath Council, awards to all, Community Foundation of Surrey, Johnson's Wax and Tesco's. Strong relationships have been built, and now we know a lot more about the people we support. We've gained DBS checked telephone befrienders, which we hope to keep. Vulnerable people give out an awful lot of information on the phone, and we must be happy about the people that represent SHAC. These are the sort of comments we get from our befriendees. P is a real tonic. He's a good friend. Without J, I'd be quite lonely. She's a good friend. I can't wait to see her again. E has helped me so much in the lockdown. I hope she'll be in my life for a long time. C has been dropping off my favourite treats. He's a nice man. J is a good guy. Calls me every week for a chat. His jokes are dreadful, but we have great chats. J is an interesting man. I'm so lucky to have Elle. She's a good friend. It was so difficult to choose comments. We've absolutely got loads. Can I have next slide, please? A volunteer recruitment drive had to be cancelled. A joint celebration with Camberley Care and Voluntary Services funded by the lottery had to be cancelled. We've been working a lot more hours as we felt the need to support our elderly people. We've supported them in such a way they now rely on us for shopping, topping up electric meters, etc. We found it difficult to switch off, worrying about individuals, phoning them at weekends and evening. A lot more people need our help since COVID. Next slide, please. Accessibility for elderly people accessing the government site for the continuation of food parcels. The automated phone line is difficult to operate and is expensive for pay-as-you-go phones. I emailed welfare as the gentleman requested his food provision to be continued as he could not operate the phone system and could someone contact him. I was sent the government link to forward to him. I don't know how he's supposed to use that if he couldn't manage the phone system. So I registered him as I was told it would probably be quicker. There's a lot of issues with people needing more support, elderly people. As you can see, a small proportion have access to phone and internet. We need to have everything in place in case of a second pandemic. The council and Surrey Heath Prepared have done so much supporting these people. We need to continue, but we need to do it in a way that it's not all encompassing, that we can help people without stopping. We can help people. As you can see, there's our volunteer poster. If any of you feel inclined or know anyone that can be a volunteer, and if you've got any questions, I'm happy to try and answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Very interesting. Lovely presentation. So members, we've had presentations from 3 people, from Louise, James, and now Tracy, all about what's been going on with COVID-19. So over to you. Are there any questions for any of our speakers there? I'll ask you to raise your hands, or...
Yes, please, Councillor Perry.
Yes, please speak.
Thank you, thank you, Chair. It's just I've got 2 questions essentially. One for Louise. It's just regarding the emergency accommodation for the homeless. I'm just wondering. I've already kind of sent an email to Clive Ginman for the housing strategy, but I'm just wondering what the plan is once the crisis is over. What the plan for housing of homeless people will be. And also, just for James, I just want to say I'm pretty sure on behalf of everyone on the committee, thank you for all the work you and Surrey Heath Prepared have been doing. And especially over the time, it's been a great help for most of our communities. The main question I have is, what preparedness is SHP undertaking to mitigate a potential second wave of infections or further lockdown? Because obviously, as I imagine, if there is a further lockdown, a lot of people would feel much more comfortable knowing that Surrey Heath Prepared could just essentially leap back into action. I'm just wondering if that is something that's been discussed by the steering group and if that's on the cards. Thank you.
I'll come back first if that's okay, just regarding the homeless item. It's obviously, this is where we're then moving into recovery, Councillor Rise, and all of these points would need to be discussed, because obviously whilst under the emergency, obviously there was funds to obviously support that. Going forward, we'll need to make a decision with regards to how we move forward, as you say. Obviously, it was amazing, really, in some ways, with regards to obviously getting people safe. And obviously what we would like to see is how we can continue that, but obviously it costs money, and obviously I'm afraid, unfortunately, that's what it always comes back to. But I know that the team will look at different issues, and I know that Jenny Rickard is working on a paper at the moment alongside the housing team with regards to this item. So I apologise I haven't got a bit more detail for you on that, but I will make sure that I refer it back to the housing team as well. Just to say that you actually asked that more specific question.
Thank you. Any more questions?
So I think Morgan had one for me, didn't you?
Beg your pardon, carry on, James.
And the question was, what would we do in the event of a second spike? And yes, we've had a sort of, we have discussed it. And I think it very much depends on the situation at that time. Is it a complete national lockdown? Is the need the same, or is the need perhaps evolved? Certainly, our community and our retail have adapted quite well. So, will the need be the same? Will we have the availability of volunteers that we had when we started? There was that neatness. Yes, there was a lockdown which produced a lot of need, but it also meant that people were available. Right now, one of the reasons we're drawing down for the 1st July is because so many of our volunteers are returning back to work, schools have opened. So I think it would depend. But as I finished the presentation, what I said was I really want SHP to have that utility. So if we needed to take it off the shelf, there is something that a group of people, maybe a new group of people, maybe a new group of coordinators, I don't know, could certainly reapply again, should it be required.
Okay. Question from me, really. There seemed to be a lot of duplication of activity between the various organisations. Could there be closer collaboration there, do you think?
I'll come back on that just to start off with. I think, sorry if the presentations have sort of come across like that, because actually we were actually dealing with very different areas. So whilst I appreciate that Surrey Heath Prepared were very much looking after the neighbourhoods and very much out in all of the wards, and that was sort of making sure that the more general requirements were needed, we were dealing then at the borough level within the shielded list, which we weren't able to give to Surrey Heath Prepared because, again, with data, etc., we weren't allowed to share that. So that's why we actually brought our, I suppose, our processes together. And this is why the same food bank was drawn on for the food to go out to all of the different areas. So I suppose, as I say, hopefully, if it did seem like there was duplication, I don't think it was meant in that way. And obviously the same with Surrey Heath Aged Concern. Obviously their role was very much, you know, about keeping in contact and befriending. And again, it was how we could then use their expertise, because again, our staff might not always be trained to deal with and being a befriender, and it again has got requirements and skills to it. So again, hopefully we were referring those into the right places. So it was trying to then, we were coordinating at all times. And one thing I didn't mention was that, to start off with, again here as well, we were having a daily meeting at the council. It was sort of like we call it the gold command. You went into command and control in a situation like this. But Surrey Heath Prepared, so James or Mike were always at those meetings, again, always making sure that we were sharing knowledge and information. And again, Jane Boytle in her role as Community Partnerships Officer, making sure again that we're connecting up within the community and making sure that we're getting all of the information out to the right people, so that to try and prevent that duplication. But I do appreciate it can appear that the same role was happening, but it was happening for different people in different places. So it was all about trying to cut that duplication down as much as possible. I don't know if James wants to add anything or either.
No, I think the communication between us was excellent, even to the extent where some of the requests for help that came into our call centre, we passed up to you because that was the right place, and you passed some down to us. So as we evolved, we learned a lot and we streamlined the whole process.
Yeah, and I also worked with Surrey Heath Prepared as well, so it followed through. I had referrals both from Surrey Heath Prepared and the council for elderly people to ring them on a weekly basis, and council were doing a good job, but obviously they were finding more immediate things needed for them. I was finding immediate things, but chatting and finding about their families and more in-depth things. So just really
Thank you, Louise. I think Councillor Bates got a question.
Yes, I actually have a comment and just a couple of quick questions. So firstly, just on Surrey Heath Prepared, I just want to highlight something for those who are perhaps watching online, which is the great degree of political joint working that actually took place. I can remember getting a phone call one day from Paul Deach, who's probably about to fall off his chair at home, asking if I'd be willing to help, and I know others did as well. And I think councillors quite often have very little in common, and politicians tend to argue a lot. But this is one occasion when all of us, regardless of our views, were willing to support and care for our community, and we've done that together. And I think all of us, many of us have been involved in that, who are members of the committee and watching. And I think that's been great to do that. And James has obviously helped to chair that, and Mike has been involved, and there's been a wider steering group. I think that's a good thing in itself. The actual question I have is in regard to Aged Concern, and you raised some really interesting practical issues that I just want to touch on. One of which was around carers, and the other was around practical forms. So my question, I suppose, is thinking ahead as to what we can learn from this pandemic. Carers and forms are two things I've kind of had to experience a lot recently in a personal capacity. So what, if anything, can we do to address this issue of carers needing support? You've mentioned there's a waiting list. So what more can we do to address issues around befriending and visiting as a council? And also linked to that is, I've just had to deal with a funeral, and it's taken 4 of us to deal with that. And there's a lot of financial paperwork, and it's not the most difficult arrangement. But there are many older people who have to deal with this on their own. So what, if anything, can we do either to support you as Aged Concern or wider advice agencies in order to deal with situations such as funerals and financial paperwork? And the example you gave, an older person who was struggling with a phone line. And finally, and this is something for the agencies really, is what have we learned as a result of doing this, that we can then tell those in charge, whether it's our own council leader, who I believe is on this call, or our MP, our local parties, so that we can then make sure that these sorts of practical problems are dealt with and don't happen again.
Thank you. Tracy?
I don't know where to start with that. With regard to the elderly people, they need a lot of support. And I got a lot of support from Citizens Advice. Gillian Beaumont, I've got a very good relationship with. And also any questions I couldn't deal with, I went back to welfare, Citizens Advice. We don't know everything, and we just try and help practically as possible. With the lady who was going through the funeral plans, it was more reassurance and trying to tell her at the time that it didn't matter that she didn't fill the forms in. She was getting panicky about getting upstairs. She couldn't get it. Things like that. It was more reassurance. It can wait. It will get to the end. We'll get it sorted and just do. Literally, she was reading the forms to me on the phone, and we were going through a page every day, and it's just general supporting. And obviously, if I know I can relay any problems or that people have, elderly people especially, because obviously they're not as techie as most, I can relay this back to the councillors, back to Jane, who I have a good relationship with, then these things can be sorted. It's baby steps, to be honest, and making sure no one falls through the loop. And what I've found is anyone that I've referred to, I've kept to another agency. I have kept on until I make sure that it's sorted. I've made the agency come back to myself rather than knowing that I've passed something on and just forget about it, because things do get forgotten, especially in times like this.
Thank you, Tracy. If anybody wants to speak, please put your hand up. Okay, I can see all your screens. Yes, Councillor Wren.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to express a personal thanks to all the charities and what they've been doing, and actually also the political spectrum, including Councillor Deach, who have done a lot over the last couple of months, and that should be appreciated. And I just want to go on and say I had a really lovely call from my mother, who has been shielding this whole time from the council, and they were very charming and sweet to her, and it was very much appreciated. So I do want to express a thanks for that. Just a question, and I'm not sure if you have the detail regarding council tax. And I know the council offered an opportunity for people to extend council payments over a 12-month period. And I was just wondering what data we have about what residents actually took that offer up, and what residents have actually, in terms of numbers and support for residents in terms of financial stress over this period of time and moving forward, especially in recovery.
I don't actually have specific numbers. I apologise for that, but I, again, will get those for you. However, what I do know, and for fact, is actually we haven't seen a decrease in the number of people paying their council tax in this first part of the financial year. We believe that could be because of the furlough scheme and perhaps other schemes that have been put in place to support people. Here in Surrey Heath, we haven't actually seen that. Now, what we are wondering is that as the economy obviously starts to kickstart and you start to have people going back into jobs, the furlough scheme is changing with regards to it being part employer and part government. We might start to see some changes, and I think also we will start to perhaps see, because there is a belief we may move into recession, that it may be then that the council tax numbers actually start to be affected. But at this point in time, they haven't been affected, not like we actually thought they would be, because as you say, yes, we were there ready to sort of obviously give assistance where we could, and the team have worked very hard with any inquiries that we've had. Now, I appreciate you may want more specifics on numbers, and I will get those. I know we have them, and I'll make sure that those are followed up through to the committee through Eddie.
Thank you. Any more questions? Councillor Wheeler.
Thank you, Chair. Mine relate to a number of things. Firstly and foremostly, obviously the Surrey Heath prepared number has been widely used across the borough. I'm not sure who owns that number or to which organisation it currently and will return to. But I wondered whether or not there is any way in which there could be an automated message that points that people that are still dialing that number, irrespective of how well we communicate with people. Obviously, there's been a lot of marketing. There will be a lot of stuff that when you Google it, Surrey Heath Prepared will come up. And I just wondered what plans we have for making sure that number can either have a recorded message pointing them through, I would have thought, to Surrey Heath in the first instance, or what we're going to do in order to manage the habitual nature of some of the people that are calling. And linked to that, what are we going to do at Surrey Heath to make sure that people that are still trying to contact that number are picked up and are supported by either the relevant local organisations or the local coordinators that are continuing after the end of Surrey Heath Prepared. The other thing is a lot of the people that we are helping, there seems to be a general assumption that people will no longer need shopping done and people will no longer be shielding. There are an awful lot of people that for a whole variety of reasons won't be leaving their home until there is a vaccine or a viable assistance with treatment should they be unlucky enough to contract COVID. So I think we do need to have a plan moving forward as a borough that is coordinated ward by ward, and I would encourage every single one of the ward councillors here to step up and do their piece, because we've been elected to represent people, and I know that a lot of people have done a great deal of work within the communities. Others haven't in quite the same way, but I think we need to be contactable to make sure that we can help people get through to the right agencies. So that's sort of one point, but we do obviously need Surrey Heath Borough Council to step forward and make sure there's a way of triaging those calls and triaging the need that I don't think will go away. And the other thing is to understand how we're planning for what is likely to be a vast number of our residents who find themselves in financial hardship. If we look at the number of people that work, obviously in the hospitality industry, but also the number of residents that we've got that work at Heathrow and even down as far as Gatwick, and the impact that that will have on our residents, on our businesses, on the businesses that supply Heathrow. We're going to need to have something, I think, fairly robust to support those residents, many of whom will be finding themselves in financial hardship for the first time. So it's really what plans that we've got in relation to that, how we're going to manage the telephone number as well, and who in the borough is going to pick up that need.
Thank you, Victoria. Louise, you can handle that?
I'm going to hand over first to James, and then I'll take over from him.
So I'll pick up the first bit about Surrey Heath Prepared having a smooth transition. Our internal communications is first to our organisation to get them preparing for the drawdown, but it is also then ensuring that people understand that we are closing and what lies ahead. We need to push that information, and the council will also be pulling the information. The number for Surrey Heath Prepared is the number for High Cross Church, and the IT and comms setup that we've invested in High Cross Church will allow us to leave that on an answering machine number. So when people phone in, it won't go to a dead end, which I think is your concern. Similarly, we've got our Facebook and we've got our website pages, and those will also sit with information to explain that SHP work is closed, and for those that need help and support, they will be redirected and signposted to where they need to go.
Okay, then just picking up from obviously the borough's role then with regards to that. So I mentioned very briefly, and I appreciate, we're moving into maintenance and recovery. So what that means is that we are now looking at how we redeploy staff. So for example, the theatre isn't going to be opening in the foreseeable future. We're looking at options around the contact centre as well, taking on the role of these calls, because as you've said, they don't just go away, and the shielded don't just, as I say, as you've said, will not just go out. And we know that as a council we have a duty to continue to obviously offer that support to our community. What I was meaning in my presentation, which I appreciate, again, didn't sort of go into an awful lot of detail, But where we have been proactively calling people, what we are now trying to do is, because we cannot sustain over 20,000 calls, what we've got to move down to is how often do you need a call from us? And we're actually now sort of changing that. And also then we have a new communication that's going out, which will give them the new number that will be us to contact. As we said, Highton Cross Church will refer into that cell of people who will still be dedicated for a period of time into this particular role, because again, as you've said, we have a duty as a council to continue with that support. Jane's also working with Surrey Heath Prepared, as we've already talked about what things will look like in the future, and also about trying to hold on to some of the volunteers that are not going back to work necessarily and have still volunteered. And I know she is talking to all of the different coordinators alongside Surrey Heath Prepared, again, to make sure that we know that all the requirements by ward that are needed to continue this maintenance of support that is required. And the other point you mentioned was around the economy. Again, within our recovery option, we have 6 work streams. And one of those work streams is specifically around the economy. So what we are looking at the moment, and we're making contact and we're making available advice for businesses with regards to, as you say, the processes they may have to go through. Again, there have been grant schemes that they can apply for, and just general advice, again, that the council can give. It's also then taking that, because obviously we don't have all of the answers, it's then using other areas like the LEP. So we're very much involved with LEP and how they can give support into our area, and Business South as well. So that if there's training needed, so we're looking at virtual training, any skills, etc. And obviously we will also need to work with Job Centre Plus as well, as you said, with regards to if unfortunately we start to move into and start to see redundancies, again, what support will we need to try and give, again, through different community groups, etc., that we've also got within Surrey Heath. If I haven't answered that fully enough, I can give you more information, but as I say, hopefully that's okay.
Thank you. Councillor Deach next, please.
I was going to say, Matt, sorry, just before we move on, Chair, if I could just come back with one supplementary question. I know that one of the areas that we lost at the beginning of COVID was a lot of the voluntary groups that were coordinated through Voluntary Support North Surrey, and I just wondered what engagement activities we'd undertaken to make sure that those organisations can get the support they need to be up and running. And very much linked to that, one of the major areas of concern, which I think all of those organisations are facing, is transport. So a lot of them did a lot of transport of residents to hospitals and things. That at the moment is still very, very difficult. I don't know if it's changed. I must confess I haven't tried this week, but our own community transport has an answer phone message that says that it's full and can't take any more messages. So we just wondered what plans we had to look at to plug the gap with our community transport and our community transport provision, whilst the voluntary support organisations can't support because most of their drivers are in the at-risk category, and also what engagement activities we're undertaking with them to get them back up and running. I'm very lucky with the villages that I represent. They were supported and they've not closed, so they're ready to step back up or to continue what they're doing. But I know that other areas haven't been quite so fortunate.
Thank you, Councillor. Now, Councillor Deach, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to really pick up on one of the points that Victoria made in terms of economic development, and I'm sure, like many of my colleagues, I get an enormous amount of email, more than I've ever got before, from local businesses who are really struggling, who some are, probably on the verge of going under. And that type of thing. And really, I just want an assurance from you, Louise, that we have the necessary resources in terms of council officers to, because I think you're going to get, if you haven't already, going to get a huge influx of calls from businesses of all sizes. So I just want to make sure that the support is there and available to give them all the help and advice that they need.
With regards to the economic development question, the economic development team is actually only 2 officers. Having said that, though, to be clear how it works and we make better resilience, is that there's also then the business rates team, and the teams actually work very closely together, because obviously a lot of inquiries into the council will be through the business rates and obviously making that inquiry in the first instance. So if business rates can't help from the point of view of grants that businesses aren't eligible for, or they've got further questions, that's when it would then go into the economic development team. Reassuring you that we're going to be able to obviously answer everybody's questions, I'm not sure, Paul. We will always do our absolute utmost to obviously help wherever we can. We will obviously also use the bid within, that's just for Camberley, I appreciate, but also looking again to talk to councillors as well with regards to assistance that's maybe needed then out in other areas. But if you do have any particular inquiries that you need us to assist with, again, please do forward them on to myself, or there's Teresa Hogsberg, the Economic Development Manager, or Sam Marshall, and they will obviously get in contact with those businesses and point them in the right direction if indeed we don't have the information for them. So please be advised that you could do that. Just to quickly answer Councillor Wheeler, just about the community transport, I take note with regards to I'll look into obviously the answer phone message at first instance as an immediate point, but bigger picture point, just to answer. Obviously, social distancing, we still have the issue, apart from obviously if we have a minibus that we can use, and I suppose if it's an emergency, but again, until the hospitals start to do what I'd call more their daily routine, and that starts to increase, which I know it will do, and obviously we will be watching that. Obviously we will try and advise where we can. I am just going to ask very quickly there over to Jane Boytle whether or not it's a subject at all that's come up with Voluntary Services North Surrey, but
hasn't come up with Voluntary Services North Surrey, but it has come up with other coordinators that I've spoken to today. Right, okay. And the answer to it is that we can't really go until we get government guidance on it, and we haven't got it. I checked with our taxi administrator today, and she is still waiting on it. The advice is unclear, so whilst we're in unclear, we won't go ahead with it. Darren Williams has said if there is an emergency situation, he would put something on to actually provide a service, but obviously that's more of a one-off, not an ongoing situation.
Did you hear that, councillors? Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Louise. Members, we've got quite a lot more left on the agenda. Are there any more really burning issues questions you want to raise at this point on this subject before we move on? Councillor Garrett.
It's probably an observation, but obviously a question in there. So what I've noticed is the community's pulling together, which is really good, and neighbours are helping neighbours. So some of the younger neighbours are helping some of the older neighbours with food and prescriptions. The issue with that is that those won't be appearing in the figures that Surrey Heath Prepared will have seen. So when the people go back to work and the neighbours aren't able to help them, those older people may not have the lifelines they had before, and because some of them haven't got the technology, won't necessarily know where to be signposted. So it's just a comment that some of the people that we've been helping are on SHP, but some of them haven't been. They won't be on the system anywhere. So you might suddenly get an influx of extra people, older people maybe, that haven't been picked up elsewhere.
Yeah, I was very conscious not to shower you with graphs of data, and that data is only as good as the input that's gone in. And I know that below all of that, there's a lot of street level activity that's taking place. And I think one of the things that I'm being reassured of, and I think coordinators are being reassured progressively, is when they have a one-to-one conversation with Jane, then they can talk through the specifics in their area. And Jane is absolutely, from where I sit, best placed to then either learn from that or perhaps provide advice and support back. So as we work our way through the wards and the areas, Jane's learning more, but I think the coordinator is also being reassured that there are more things in place than perhaps may be apparent.
Thank you very much. I think that's the end of that session now. So my thanks to Louise, James and Tracy for enlightening us on that subject. It's a huge subject. Millions of questions will come out, I'm sure. But members have heard that they can approach us with suggestions, questions, whatever. So let's now move on to the next thing on the agenda, which is a presentation by Inspector Alec James, who's our new local Surrey Heath Police Commander. And he'll be updating us on the Surrey Heath Community Safety Partnership and other issues. So Alec, over to you.
Good evening. Thank you very much, Chair. And good evening, councillors, officers and members of the public. I'll just wait for my presentation to pop up. Thank you. So it's a great pleasure to be introducing myself as the new Borough Commander for Surrey Heath. It's a great opportunity for me to introduce myself and give you a little bit of information about the direction that I'd like to take Surrey Heath Safer Neighbourhoods team. So the majority of my career has been spent in investigations. I've been in the Criminal Investigations Department, Safeguarding Investigation Unit and Sexual Offences Investigation Team as a DC, DS and a Detective Inspector. Most recently, I've been lucky enough to have the opportunity to work for the Chief Constables, Nick Fgrave and Gavin Stevens, working on their criminal justice and their neighbourhood policing portfolios. So I'm really looking forward to bringing those skills and that experience to this role. Most lately, I've been working with the Local Resilience Forum, working with Surrey County Council, the Military Surrey Fire and Rescue, volunteers from Team Rubicon and colleagues from Surrey Police to ensure there was sufficient provision for those deceased that we've lost during the pandemic and to support the NHS. So I'm keenly aware of how the pandemic has affected our communities. And if I could have the next slide, please. And it's been inspiring listening to the presentations that have come before me and hearing about all that volunteering, and it's people that are going to get us through this. And it's people that are my priority. I want people to be safe and I want them to feel safe. How I'm going to do that? I'm going to work with my community and partners to better understand their needs and the risks and the threats that they face. I want to make sure I'm having regular formal and informal contact with my communities. And I want to make sure that they're knowing what we're doing and why we're doing it. I want to focus on prevention. As I said, a lot of my career has been spent in investigation, and at that stage, it's too late. I want to stop those victims from being made. I want to stop those from stop those investigations from having to happen in the first place. And I want to work with our community and partners to solve problems. And to do that, I'll be prioritising the people, places and groups with the highest need. If I could move on to the next slide, please. And what I mean by that is I want to identify those people that are most vulnerable in our communities. So those repeat victims of domestic abuse, the people that are going missing most often, those children and young people most at risk of being exploited, those repeat locations, those dangerous locations, those high value locations that could be subject to burglaries and thefts. I want to identify those groups that are presenting the highest risk, the abusers, the extremist groups, the people perpetrating hate crime, the repeat DA perpetrators, the traffickers, and build plans to focus and target our activity to address that behaviour. So what does that mean in practice? How am I going to do that? If I could have the next slide, please. I want to apply a problem-solving approach, prevent, put in early intervention and conduct effective investigations. So that means working with you, working with the community, working with partners to understand why the problems are occurring and to put in effective measures to stop them from happening. to get in with early intervention to help offenders understand the impacts of their behaviours, and ultimately to make sure they're held to account for their actions by conducting effective investigations. So there's some examples here from our response to the pandemic. During this time, Surrey Police have been running something called Operation Apollo. Nationally, it's been Operation Tala. And as a result of that Operation Apollo, they've been gathering data on all the antisocial behaviour that's been coming in. They've been looking at peak times and locations, repeat locations. So that's been fed out to our safer neighbourhood teams. So we've been able to patrol those locations and feed out information through social media. And that's been some of that preventative activity. We've also been aware of that risk that people have been trapped inside their homes with their abusers, and identifying that perhaps supermarkets and pharmacies might be the only outlet that they can get to. So we've had officers from our Safer Neighbourhood teams deployed to those locations to make sure we can pick up those reports and safeguard people. Our Safer Neighbourhood teams have been patrolling those open spaces and parks, engaging with people, explaining and encouraging them to disperse from the area if they're in breach of the guidance. And ultimately, when that's failed, they've been enforcing those guidelines, and 11 fixed penalty notices have been issued during this period. Supporting the LRF again, we've been identifying those vulnerable people. That information has been fed through to us where they haven't been able to be reached through a phone call. Our Safer Neighbourhood teams have been physically visiting those people, conducting checks through open windows, socially distanced, to identify what their needs are, and in some cases completing risk assessments, going to help them go and get medications, but making sure if their risk is apparent that that's being fed back through to adult services. If I could have the next slide, please. Oh, that's gone slightly wonky. I'll talk a little bit more about the impact on policing of the COVID-19 pandemic. Prior to lockdown and prior to the pandemic, Surrey Heath had been seeing reductions in all types of antisocial behaviour. It had been down by 12%. Environmental and antisocial behaviour down by 7.5%, nuisance antisocial behaviour down by 15%, and personal antisocial behaviour down by 5%. We'd seen high harm offences increasing, residential burglary increasing, and violent offences increasing. We'd seen hate crime reducing by 14%, with a positive outcome rate, which is really high, 19%, which is up by 6. That's one of our strongest performing outcomes. So I was really pleased to see that we're focusing on that key crime, which has a significant impact on people's lives. We'd seen robbery reducing, but we're only dealing with small numbers though, so some variations can result in large percentage changes, but that was down by 23%. Theft had reduced, as had public order offences. We'd seen improvements in commercial burglary outcomes, and violence had remained stable. From looking at those figures, I'd be thinking that we need to put more work into improving our detection rates. And that's something hopefully I can, with my experience as being a detective, bring to bear. During lockdown, though we've had a reduction in our 101 calls and 999 calls, we've seen reductions in incidents on the road, in notifiable offences, violence, burglary, robbery, theft, damage, sexual offences and hate crime. But we've seen increases in reports of antisocial behaviour, sudden death reports, domestic abuse, violence without injury, drugs, child abuse and fraud. So my last slide here is demonstrating the resources that we can bring to bear. If you could go back one for me. The resources that our Safer Neighbourhood team can bring to bear in keeping Surrey Heath safe. So we've got 18 working in our Safer Neighbourhood team soon, but that's going to be bolstered by an increase in our PCSO establishment, and the 1920 precept increase is going to see 2 additional neighbourhood specialist officers and a youth intervention officer or youth engagement officer coming in. And also, as a result of that precept investment in Surrey Heath, we've seen the implementation of a problem-solving team, which has analysts in it that we can draw upon so we can help us really understand those problems and target our activity better. And in the first year of the Prime Minister's pledge, the uplift, we're going to see an investment in keeping the most vulnerable people safe from harm and in prevention and proactivity. So additional officers going into child exploitation teams and missing units, safeguarding investigation units and divisional proactive teams. So as a very approximate figure, Surrey Heath will see the benefit of about 5 additional police officers, although it's not, it wouldn't be calculated like that because they would serve the whole of our Western Division. So I hope that's given you a bit of a flavour for myself, my background, and how I would like to take policing in Surrey Heath forward.
Thank you. Questions, members? Paul Deach.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Alec, for that presentation. Very enlightening. Just a couple of points I'd like to make. Now, I totally get that your, I suppose, priority has to be centred around the possible harm that may come to residents and the danger that they may be put in. I completely get that. But as a local councillor, I would say that the vast majority of the issues that get emailed to me or that I get on social media from residents that are not related to the council are of a crime and disorder nature. And I have to say that it's the view of many of the residents that I represent that low-level crime is often ignored by Surrey Police. I can only speak for my own area, can't speak for everybody else's area, but the types of things are antisocial neighbours, antisocial behaviour involving vehicles is a big one, particularly in Mitchett, and the like. And I was very surprised actually to hear you say in your presentation there that you've noticed a reduction in antisocial behaviour. I wonder if that is that you've noticed a reduction in the report rate, perhaps. Maybe that's where you get the figure from. And if that's the case, I would suggest the reason for that is that because residents feel that when they report these things, they're just ignored. So what's the point? So I have to say that that is a view that is held by many residents. I've raised this with your predecessor and the predecessor before you, before him, I should say. And, you know, I get the whole thing about priorities, but you say that early intervention is one of the things that you're looking at right now. And I would suggest that dealing with low-level antisocial behaviour and low-level crime would fit into that category very well, because often it's the minor things that then develop into more serious things when people just get more and more bold because they realise that whatever they do, they get away with. And I wondered what you might have to say in response to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So harm can be considered, I think harm can be considered different ways. It's not just going to be the physical harm. There's also the harm to our communities. So if we are seeing a significant volume of antisocial behaviour in a particular area, or if we see an increase in a particular crime type in a particular area that is becoming acute and it's persistent, that for me comes under that high risk behaviour, and that comes under me for that vulnerable location, because our community, it's those multiple instances that are gathered together which is going to cause the harm. On their own, perhaps not, but together they will be. And I certainly would be looking at addressing those. And it's really important to me that the community continue to provide this information, because as you say, otherwise that can skew my figures. I really want to be focusing on the data. I want to be targeting our activity. I don't want to be drifting. I want to know where my problems are. If the community are telling me where those problems are, they're telling me where those crimes are happening, I can make sure our resources are targeted to those locations where the offences are happening at the right time. So I can want to make sure they're in the right place at the right time, addressing the right people. So absolutely, I will take those offences seriously, and I think they need to be dealt with seriously because it's only right for our community.
Thank you for that. Question from me, first of all. I think once government support for the present COVID-19 fades away, we're going to see a big peak in crime, is my opinion. There are going to be a lot of people who have lost their jobs, who at the moment are being subsidised and supported. Once that falls away, you're going to have a huge spike in unemployment, people going broke and what have you. And that in turn will create a lot of crime, I think. Burglaries, thefts, all sorts of things. Do you have a contingency plan in place to sort of cope with that if that happens?
So my plan at the moment is to make sure that we've got our finger on the pulse. So we're monitoring any increases, we're identifying where those increases might be happening and who they might be happening to. So that we can get in with the early intervention, make sure they're being supported with help from partners to prevent that offending behaviour. We've got our Operation Apollo team, which have that overarching visibility as well, which are going to be feeding back into us, where we're going to report back any crime trends that we're identifying, so we can have that, we're going to get that intelligence from across the whole organisation. But so it is certainly something that we have considered, but not something I have got immediate plans in place to address other than maintaining oversight.
So Garrett.
Thank you. A couple of points really. And I don't want to hark on about stuff that's happened in the past. It's off the back of something that Councillor Deach has said. I live on the Old Dean. I'm councillor on the Old Dean. And there's been a couple of occasions recently where residents have contacted me and they've actually said pretty much along the lines of Councillor Deach, we don't report stuff anymore because we know that if we report it, nothing's going to get done and we're wasting our time. Now, I get where you're coming from, but something needs to change. For people to start reporting stuff, they need to be aware that if they do report it, in the long term, something's going to happen. But that's not where they are at the moment. So, you're going to have to pull your rabbit out of a hat and try and do something magical with that. And just off the back of that, last week, certainly, I know on the Old Dean, we had a spate of door-to-door scammers. They were working their way round the streets, knocking on doors. I think it was energy, trying to get people to change their energy suppliers, etc., etc. Now I know over a couple of days they were pretty much all over the Old Dean. Again, it goes back to this: if we knew that we would report it to someone and someone could come along and then jump on it straight away, then they wouldn't have got halfway around the estate. So again, I know it's probably something you hear all the time, but it is something we hear from residents all the time. So obviously we need to come up with some sort of solution.
Inspector.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, and thank you, Chair. I absolutely agree. It's so important that our communities feel confident to report to us and know that we're going to be responsive, and also that they understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. One of the risks I have identified already is when I'm talking about those high risk places, those places that aren't reporting to us. So I'm going to be going to my analytical team. I'm going to say, right, provide me with a map of Surrey Heath. Tell me the areas that I'm not getting any crime reports from, because that will tell me those areas which are disengaged with police. And it'll be my intention to be going out to those communities so I can hear them and hear what they're saying and feed back to them what we're doing. So for an example from that, the door-to-door salesman, what I would like to happen in those circumstances is that getting reported. Our PCSOs and our neighbourhood officers responding out to the scene to try and identify and stop the offenders for a start, but also putting that preventative work in, going around the streets and telling people there's a risk here. There are people doing door-to-door sales, watch out. And then making sure that we're communicating that through either social media or through any of those newsletters that go out, so people know what we're doing.
Thank you. Councillor Crook.
Hi, I just wanted to say welcome, Alec, to Surrey Heath Borough Council. It's great to have you on board. I just wanted to sing a bit of praises actually to your PCSOs. In Frimley, I've had a couple of issues with antisocial behaviour, and you guys are on it for me, which is brilliant. And also a vulnerable resident that I had flagged up, your PCSO went out for me as well. So from me, it was a thank you, and keep up the great work.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wren.
Thank you. Well, Alec, welcome. And policing has definitely been a hot topic recently. I won't question you on anything that's going on with that, but I do have a couple of questions, and I think it's been raised, and it's definitely an issue that comes up more frequently than I expected. I'm a relatively new councillor. I've only been doing it for about a year, and policing matters is surprisingly one of the most common things I get talked about. Which is just part of the parcel of being a councillor. There's a lot of people not sure what councils, do what. But I think part of the problem is community policing, which is the police knowing their police officers, the PCSOs, knowing who they are and knowing who to contact, especially for this low-level antisocial stuff, which is that it is relatively low level. It's not necessarily an emergency most often, but being able to find someone that they can contact, especially PCSOs, is really important. And I think part of that is boots on the ground. And obviously having a lack of police that you do, that is now hopefully recovering and having more police come in. I want to know what kind of community engagement is going to be driven by yourself, and how are you going to have those boots on the ground that actually get to know the community? Because I think that's actually one of the biggest elements of it.
Thank you. Inspector.
Thank you, Councillor. So one of the very first things that I did when I arrived 3 weeks ago now was issue a preemptive dispersal order after we received information that someone was going to be coming into Camberley. They were calling out to all their friends on social media to descend on the town centre, where they were going to try and shoot a video with drones, and we'd looked at the intelligence about this person before, and they'd been associated with disorder. So I was approached by my team. They'd done that research. We issued a preemptive dispersal order to provide officers with a power of arrest if they attended. And I also wrote to the gentleman in question to explain the offences that would be committing under the Coronavirus Act, under the drone legislation, and also the Public Order Act. We had that delivered to him, and it was explained to him. In the end, he didn't turn up in Camberley. There wasn't a lot of disorder. They went somewhere else where there wasn't so much community impact, but they didn't come here. They didn't cause the disorder. And that happened without any police officers on the street. And our populations are quite large, and I don't know if it would be possible for our PCSOs to be on that first name basis with all of them and be able to take all the reports from our community. I think is the point I wanted to make there. So it's really important that our community go through the route that is set up through our 101 or 999 or online reporting, where it goes through our contact team who are trained in assessing threat, harm and risk. That can then get put on our crime information system, and then it gets disseminated out to the right people that need to know. And it also means that myself and analysts can look at that data and draw down on it to build up these maps and build up the intelligence picture about what's happening. It is less effective to do it the way through the PCSOs, but it is still really, really important that they know they have PCSOs there, and the PCSOs are engaged with the community, and they're targeting their activity as well to those people groups and places that need them the most. So I've got a a meeting soon with my team where we're going to be discussing how we're going to have a really effective engagement strategies. So I'll be looking to certainly build something, Councillor, so that our communities do know who represents them, who is looking after them, and how they can effectively report things to us.
Thank you, Inspector. I think we could go on all night. We just have two more though. So first, Councillor Bates, then Councillor Rise. And that's the end of this one. So
thank you. Actually,
Bates first.
Thank you. It's actually on that very last point you've made, an engagement strategy, because my own perception, and obviously several colleagues have very similar points, is that for one reason or another, the relationship we may have had with individual police officers at a local level is not the same as it used to be perhaps many years ago. And so two practical suggestions that I could perhaps ask you to reflect upon rather than necessarily promise now. Firstly, could you send all of us, the councillors, details of our local neighbourhood teams? I know they're on the police website, but I think we should know who they are on an individual basis. And secondly, I think it would be very helpful if the police on a regular basis actually engaged with local social media networks, so that actually the local residents can know who individual officers are as well, or neighbourhood teams, because I'm afraid I don't think the confidence is necessarily there. And it's not about the work of individual officers who I used to work in community safety myself for many years, but unfortunately the community link has to be built in a personal way. And you can't do it with everybody, but you can do it in things like social media. And I would actively encourage that now.
Inspector, any response?
I'd absolutely agree with the councillor. Social media plays such a large part in our engagement strategy. I saw recently a report that was done on young people in Surrey Heath, and they were saying that 62% of them, though, didn't engage with our Surrey Police social media output. So what the councillor highlights there about engaging with other social media entities is really important, and it makes it more about that social network rather than the police pumping out information or them thinking they have to engage with us. We go into them. So that's a really good point.
Chair, could I just...
Thank you. Sorry.
Louise Livingston, just for a minute. Can I just make you aware that we've got a big screen in front of us, but Councillor McGrath has had her hand up a couple of times, and you may not have seen it, but just to make you aware, I know you're only trying to have a couple more questions, but if you could just make sure she has the chance to ask her question, because she has raised her hand a couple of times, just to make you aware of that.
I'm happy to take my space.
I think we can do both, but do you want to make your point first, Councillor Rice? Then we'll finish with Councillor McGrath.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Inspector, as well. I just want to bring up an earlier topic about police response, and I think it's important to point out that a lot of the lack of response people feel is due to police numbers being so low, which is obviously a national government issue. But my main question to you, Inspector, is, and maybe if Louise, I'm not sure if she can on this one, but it's like, what can we as a council do to assist you, to assist Surrey Heath Police Force, to assist Surrey Police in ensuring that we do have the officers that we need, that we have the information that we need, or that we have essentially the resources that we need? Is there anything that we as the council can do? Thank you.
Inspector?
So I would say in the first instance, and thank you for that offer, Councillor, would be to remind our communities to carry on reporting, and also to carry on providing that information to us. I had an email earlier on today from a councillor who was passing on community intelligence from someone that had spotted some drug dealing in their area. I was able to deploy a PCSO. They did some house to house. They were able to identify some times within which that was occurring. So now we can put in a targeted patrol of that area when it's happening. So it's been that link, and it's providing that reassurance, I suppose, that we are doing something with that information. It's not going into a black hole. It's really valuable for me.
And can I just add, from the council's perspective, I appreciate we haven't had the chance to work with the inspector yet, as he's only been here for 3 weeks. But obviously we have been working alongside the team for many years. And quite recently we did have training with our frontline staff on that very point about gathering intelligence and making sure they knew the correct process to use to get that information into the police. So again, that they can build that intelligence at all times. So we did have a training session on that, actually from Inspector Bob Darkins, who actually gave that. We also share that through the Surrey Heath Partnership, which again, the police attend, and actually deputy chair to that. And also we have the regular CHARM meetings, which is more the partnership meetings. Obviously, again, where very specific intelligence is obviously fed in and shared on a more individual basis. I think that just gives you a bit of a snapshot of some of the things that we're doing, and obviously we will continue to do. And also our corporate enforcement team and our community safety, which is Jane Boytle as well, work very closely again with the police on all manner of items to again make sure we're joining up the dots wherever we possibly can with regard to intelligence going into them.
Thank you. So, Councillor McGrath, apologies first of all. You're very dark on the picture I can see on my screen, so that's probably why I missed your hand. So apologies, but over to you for your question.
Thank you, Louise, as well, for seeing me wave. Just to say that obviously in the ward that I work in as well, I also have a shop there, and we have a bit of antisocial behaviour. And also in the village that I live, because I live in the opposite one. Now, I've asked numerous occasions, and I've even emailed as well the PCSOs, and I'm still waiting for actually one of them to even pop in to speak to me. And I've asked this since November with this. And I know obviously they're not on the ground as much as they should be. And I know that they can't go to see everybody, but it would be nice if they could like pop in or to even speak to us on the phone.
Inspector?
Yes, absolutely, Councillor. Would you like to take that offline with me so I can talk to you a little bit more about that and what's happened, and so I can explore that in a little bit more detail?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Right, that concludes this little session. So many thanks, Inspector James, for coming along this evening. And so there's probably a million other questions we could have fired at you, and we will next time you turn up at one of these sessions. So thank you again for coming this evening.
That's my pleasure.
Right. So members, we move on to the last point on our agenda, which is the work programme. You've all had a look at the suggestions for 8th of September, which is our next meeting. We've already had a request from Louise that we add an update on the COVID-19 activity into that programme, so we may juggle it around a little bit for it. But we've got on there accent housing again, clinical commissioning group, the Autism Trust, voluntary support North Surrey. Are you all happy with that suggestion, or do you have any other suggestions for our work programme? Agreed? If you agree, put your thumb up or whatever.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think everybody's in agreement for that. And going forward, so it may well change a little bit. You've got a copy of the suggestions there, but if you do have any suggestions, please let me know, and we'll try and bring in things which are relevant and current. So I think that brings us to the end of our meeting today. So thank you for your attendance. Stay safe. Sorry, who wants to speak?
I do, Chairman. But just on the point that we were talking about earlier with economic development and everything, I wondered if it might be an idea, and I've not served on this committee for a number of years, so forgive me if this has come up recently, but it might be an idea to get Enterprise M3 in to see what they're up to and what they're going to be doing in order to assist with the relief effort of the businesses, perhaps.
I think it's a good idea. I agree with that. We'll add that into the pot.
Lovely, thank you.
Any other suggestions?
Sorry, Louise, were you just about to say something?
I'm happy to help organise that for you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Right, that's it. Good night, everybody. Sleep tight.